In this video, I'm going to show you how to prepare the footings for a garage and also pouring the footers and the block foundation. And if you're new to this channel, my name's Josh. This channel is all about DIY and saving a ton of money. So be sure to subscribe, ring that bell so you get a notification every time I release a new video, and hammer that like button for me. That's all I ask in return for making this video. So this is part 2 of a multi-part series, and in part 1, I showed you the excavation for the garage. And in this part, we're going to address the footings. So let's get started. After the footers have been freshly excavated, a lot of times in these corners, you're going to have some loose dirt. So you're going to need to make sure you clean all the loose dirt out of these corners, and even down the runs, you also have some loose dirt. So make sure you clear all that out before we do the grade pins. Now that we got all the footers cleaned out, we're going to set up what's called a transit. And these are going to be used to make sure we get the footings to a grade. But he's going to get that set up, and now I'm going to get grade pins laid out. These grade pins are just 1/2-inch rebar that are 18 inches long. And depending on how tight your soil is, may depend on how long you need to get your grade pin. 18 inches is good here. That gives us 10 inches in the ground, 8 inches sticking up. And now if this was really sandy soil, you might need to get 2-foot grade pins. And if it was really tight, rocky soil, you might go with just 12-inch grade pins. So now I'm just going to go ahead and lay them out.
I like to lay my grade pins out every 3 foot.
I'm going to start with a grade pin in any corner. I'm going to go with this corner. Now I know that the grade of this dirt is where I want the bottom of the footer, and I know my footer needs to be 8 inches deep. So with that being said, when I drive this first grade pin in, I'm not going to use the transit at the moment. I'm just going to drive this down until we got 8 inches of rebar sticking up. And I recommend getting a bigger hammer to drive these in. So now we got this down to 8 inches, and that's going to be the top of all of our grade pins. So now that we got that, I'm going to shoot the next corner the same grade as the top of this pin. I'm now over here where we set the transit up, and I have my helper down there holding the stick that's going to give us the grade. So I'm going to shoot through the transit and have him mark the stick, so that way we know the exact grade at the top of that pin. Then I'm going to have him go to the next corner and drive that grade pin down to the same grade as that grade pin. All right, go ahead. All right, make a mark right there. All right, yep, that's perfect, got it. So he marked the stick at the top of that grade pin. All right, now go to that corner and let's drive that grade pin to the same grade as that corner. I'm now going to turn the camera over here so you can see him. All right, go ahead, drive the pin down about 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Now he's driving the grade pin down because it was a little high where he had it started. All right, let's check it. All right, come down just about 1/4 inch. So when you're doing these grade pins, it takes a little bit of trial and error to get your pins on right. All right, that's good. All right, so now we got our 2 back corners on grade, and we're going to go ahead and shoot a grade pin in each corner of this garage. If you're wondering what it looked like looking through this transit, if you look through the scope of this, as you can see, that little V shape is the top of the grade pin, and straighten up the stick a little bit right there. So the crosshairs is right on that V. So that's just a little bit on how that transit works. This is the second grade pin that we drove after the first grade pin. And now what we're going to do is take a string line and we're going to wrap around this grade pin, and then we're going to loop it to where it goes across the top of the grade pin, just like that. So now when we run this string line, it's going to be from the top of the grade pin to the other top of the grade pin. And that's going to be our temporary grade as we drive our other grade pins in. All right, now when we get to this other grade pin, kind of the same idea. We're going to go across the top, and then we're going to loop it around the rebar in order to hold it into place. So that way it gives us a nice grade to go off of. Now I'm just going to put this string right back on top of that pin. And now that it's at the top of the pin, we have that same grade, we're going to run our other pins right to the top of that string line. I'm now going to take my tape measure and go 3 foot from center to center for the grade pins. So I like to keep mine about 3 foot apart. It gives you a nice plane to level off of when you go to rake the concrete later. So now instead of shooting the transit, all we got to do is drive these down to the top of that string line. All right, that looks good. Now we just keep running them every 3 foot apart across the footer. So as you can see, all of those pins are at the top of that string line. So we know all of our grade pins are to grade. And now I wanted to show you something here at this long run. As you can see, there's a grade pin in the middle. And the reason why that is, it's such a long run that our string line will sag too much. So we're actually just going to go from this pin to this pin and then pull the string line, then do that next section after that. Here's a little tip. Whenever you're running the string line on top of this rebar, it wants to roll off the top. So I got a chainsaw file, and sometimes you just take it and make a couple swipes across the edge like this. It'll put a little groove in it to put the string line in. So as you can see, it made a nice groove right into that head, and now I'm going to wrap the string line and place it right in that groove. It's a much better situation if it keeps rolling off the top. It'll hold it into place. I'm now going to address the pier holes. The key concept with the pier holes is very easy. We just got to make sure we're 2 foot deep, because we got to be below the frost line, and the concrete's going to be coming up to here. So as you can see, we're plenty below the grade. And now when it comes to the pin itself, all we got to do is drive our grade pin down 8 inches so that we know our footer is going to be deep enough. So when the inspector comes, he knows we're going to pour 8 inches of concrete here as a footing. So as you can see, it's 8 inches deep. So now we know when we pour our concrete here, our footer will pass inspection. For the next step, we're going to need 20-foot pieces of rebar, along with these pieces. These are called rod chairs, and this is what's going to support the rebar up out of the bottom of the footer. And then I got rebar tie wire. Now this is 16 gauge. That's the most common gauge for tying rebar. So we're going to go and first lay out the 20-foot pieces along the perimeter of the garage. It's going to take 2 pieces side by side to lay across the footer. So first it's going to lay it all out where it goes. I'm now going to separate the rebar into 2 different runs. One on one side of the grade pin and one on the other. Now that the rebar is laying where we need it, I'm going to grab the rod chairs and start in the corner and drop one off here, and then I'm going to drop one off every other grade pin. So it ends up being about every 6 foot apart. And I'm now going to take the rebar and place on top of the rod chair like this, and then keep that pattern up going down the whole footer. And now from that spool of tie wire, I cut 6 to 8 inch pieces of tie wire in order to tie the rebar to each one of those rod chairs. All right, in order to secure the rod chair to the rebar, we just simply take the tie wire and tie it together like so. Not very complicated. Do it by hand first. And then after you do it by hand, all we have to do is take our pliers here. And these are similar, these are just linemen's used for electrical. I just use these personally. They're just going to give it a nice twist. Not too tight, it will break the tie wire, but you want to tighten it down pretty snug though so it doesn't go anywhere, like so. And then I always just bend those over so they're not sticking up. And that's all there is to securing the rebar to the rod chair. If you need to purchase any of this stuff, I'll put a link in the description below so you can purchase this for your project. Now when I get to an area like this where they overlap, I first take a piece of tie wire and tie the very ends like so, and then I'll come back on the other end and do the same, so that way they're bonded pretty darn good. And then tie it to the rod chair, and that's all there is to it. And then make sure you tighten them down using your linemen's. That looks really good, and we're ready for concrete in this section. I'm now here at a corner, and I'm going to show you how to do a corner. So I'm going to measure back to that rebar about 3 or 4 inches past the end of it, and I got about 6 foot, 6.5 to one side, 6 foot to the other. And what I'm going to do is measure the rebar and put a mark. I'm going to bend it so it curves around this corner. All right, so I'm gonna pull this rebar out and make my mark at 6 foot. I'm gonna be using a red crayon so I can see my mark. And right there looks good. So right there needs to be the inside of the bend. And this one's gonna be 6.5. And now I'm gonna take this galvanized pipe, and you can use a black iron pipe, anything solid, and I'm gonna slide it over this rebar like so, up to that red mark, or close to it, right here. And now I'm gonna bend it up. And as you can see, that gives us a nice 90-degree bend to go around that corner, and I'm gonna do the same to the other one. Now we'll place these back in the footer. All right, so this is my longer one. So I know this is my outside corner. So it's gonna be right like that. And then my other one is going to be my inside bend. And it's going to lay right beside it. All right, now we tie it together just like we did the other rod chairs. Now I'm going to tie it together right here where they overlap, and then continue that right here at the corner, and then run it out and go around the whole garage that way. Very simple. All right, as you can see, we got all the rebar in the footers, and we are ready for some concrete. And just to reiterate, we're going to have 8 inches of concrete to fill this up, and they'll be here tomorrow or the next day to do that.
I got the concrete delivered 2 days later. This was actually a Saturday because it's the only time I had to do this. And now I'm going to explain to you how to calculate the concrete for the footings. In order to do that, you would need to calculate the length times the width times the depth, and that would give you the cubic feet. And then in order to convert that into cubic yards in which the concrete comes in, you would have to divide that by 27. So for example, if you had 20 feet by 10 feet by 0.5 feet, which would be 6 inches deep, that would give you 100 cubic feet, and then divide that by 27, and that gives you 3.7 cubic yards. But a much easier method is to just use an online calculator. As you can see here, my total length of the footings was 128 feet and 2 foot wide, and I also was going to pour it 8 inches deep per code here, and that gives me 6.3 yards. And then I'm going to round it up in order to calculate for waste, because some places of the footer are wider than 2 foot, and any extra I'm going to use to fill up the pure holes, so it works out great. The method you see here is called dragging the concrete. When you use a rake to pull it around to the side, that's usually because you can't get the concrete truck back there, and it's easier to do this than it is to wheelbarrow it. And as you can see here, I'm doing a method to where I'm trying to find the top of the grade pins in order to level out the footer. As you can see it right here poking up through, this is going to get us to grade for our foundation, and I'm just going to keep tamping it with my rake in order to find all of the grade pins that we put in earlier in the video. The concrete mix used for these footings is called footer mix, and they come in different PSIs. This one that you see here is 3000 PSI. And now we are around the front of the garage to where we could pour it much easier than the back. We did not have to do the drag method here, and we just had the truck simply just pour it and drive forward, and then we just kind of leveled it out as we go. And sometimes you still got to drag the concrete back and forth in order to get the perfect levelness, and we just simply do that same technique around the whole footer of the garage. An interesting part to pouring the footers is knowing the hand gestures to give the driver in order to control the truck. I'm definitely not the best at this, so sometimes it can be a little aggravating, but the more concrete work you do, the better you're going to get at that. And also be sure to check your local building codes to make sure you're following the correct specs of your footings. Everywhere is different, so I always recommend doing that before doing any DIY project. Concrete is very apt to splash up. As you can see here, it's a little on the wet side, and it causes a lot of splashing. We're a little more dirty than what we look here on camera from the splashing, so that's just something to consider. And also, you want to make sure you allow 48 hours after you have your concrete poured for your footings in order to apply any kind of block on top of the footing. It's very important that that curing stage is not disturbed. I'm sure you noticed the cinder blocks and wood that's sitting on the ground here next to these footers. The reason why they are there is because sometimes once the truck is near empty, you can chuck up the footer into where you haven't poured yet in order to get the concrete truck to the back to pour the footers. But in this case, we actually were able to maneuver to where we didn't have to do that. And also, you can ask the driver to borrow his water hose when you're done in order to spray off your tools.
I'm back 2 days later after we poured these footers. They set up and they're solid. And now what we got to do is lay out our layout for our building on top of the footers. Now this is where you got to be very precise, because this is going to be the actual foundation once the block's laid. So we need to make sure our corners are pretty much perfect. Not pretty much, but actually 100% perfect. So this is where the squareness of your building comes in ultimately. So we're going to start out by pulling our measurements off the house, because we need to get our front layout, and then we'll square up the back corners. And I always like to use blocks, because this is going to give us a solid point to pull off of for our measurements. I like to use a red crayon to mark on top of the footer to get our layout when we first start. All right, now I'm just going to mark my 20 foot off the house on the footer first. Now what we're going to do is measure 20 foot off the house, and we're going to set a temporary corner here. And I like to remind you that this is going to get covered with concrete, so there's no block going to be laid here, but this is just to lay out the foundation.
If you're wondering why the pier holes are flush with the top of the dirt, that's because we had plenty of concrete left over in order to fill up the pier holes instead of wasting it.
Now we're going to hook a string line to that furthest block that we just set, and we're going to run it by these two sets of blocks, make sure our 20 foot's good, and then we're going to put our corner block and start leveling it up to start our first corner as our reference mark.
Now that both corners are 20 feet away from the house, I'm just going to use a string line in order to make sure that everything looks great off the house. As you can see here, we're 20 foot in the center, and also we're going to use it to mark our corner.
Now we're going to double check the level, make sure our block is setting nice and level and plumb. That looks good. The reason why that's important, as you stack these blocks up, if it starts being unplumb, and then it's going to run our corner off as we measure up higher. So we need to start out nice and plumb, and this is a good start, and our corner is where it needs to be. Now that we got our corner established, we're going to pull off of it in order to mark our layout for our garage. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and build my corner for my garage. And again, we're going to line it up with the string line, and we're going to take our level and we're going to plumb down off that string line just to make sure we're running off the line perfectly. And now if you guys remember, according to the plans, we're going 38 foot to the outside corner of this garage. All right, so I need to slide over just a little bit. Now I'm going to take the crayon and mark the footer. Now that we got our bottom block set, I'm just going to elevate it off the bottom, so that way we can pull our tape measure to do diagonal. And what we're trying to do here is just get up high enough to go across diagonally, get our diagonal measurements. As you can see, we should pass most of the dirt here, so we'll pull that here in just a minute. All right, now I got my block setting nice and plumb this way, and it's nice and plumb this way, so I know this corner is exactly where we need it. So our blocks down here, and over here in this end is sitting where we need them for the layout of this garage. So now we just got to get our back corners in a nice diagonal measurement to get it perfect. And now, using this corner as a reference, we're going to come 26 foot for the width of our garage and start our corner at the back end. All right, we're 26 foot away from that block, and now I'm going to show you a little bit of a cheat method here. If you take a look at this online calculator, this is the website, and you can put in your long side, and I got it in feet, and then your short side, and it'll give you your area, and it'll also give you your diagonal measurement, and I have it in inches because you need this to be pretty precise. So now we can measure diagonally and know exactly where to sit our corner that's in our back end of our foundation.
I'm now going to have my helper hold me in that back corner, and make sure you move anything out of the way, such as these pipes, to make sure you can pull a perfectly straight tape measure. And then I'm going to go down and grab the tape off the other side and pull, and as you can see from our diagonal and our straight measurement, that we are exactly where we need to be.
Now that we've pulled a long measurement from the total structure, we're going to do the garage now. So he's back in the corner of the garage that's up front. Then I'm going to get the diagonal for here, and I'll show you it is 46.5 inch. So if we take a look, we got 38 foot, 26 foot, and then our diagonal is 552.5 inches, which ends up being 46 foot 1/2 inch. And now if we pull the diagonal on the actual garage, as you can see, we got the 46 and 1/2 inch. So now we know this corner is sitting good, and along with the other 2 corners, now we got to do the last back corner. And now for our last corner in the back of the garage, we're just going to pull a diagonal from our first corner, and then we're going to pull down 26 foot from this corner here. So that's going to give us exactly where this corner is going to be. And then we're going to check one last time all of our measurements.
And to do this final corner, it's the exact method. We're going to pull the diagonal in the straight and then hold it together, and then we're going to adjust our blocks accordingly. And just so you know, the diagonal going both ways is going to be exactly the same. I'm sure you assume that, but I figured I would say it to clear the air on that.
All right, now that corner is setting exactly where we need it. Now we're just going to double check all of our measurements, make sure we're perfect. All 4 corners are exactly where we need them to be. Now that we got them exactly where they need to be, we need to mark the very bottom corner here, because that is what all this work was for, is just to know exactly where the 4 corners are going to be. So each block, we're going to mark this edge first using the marking paint that we use to lay out the foundation. Any spray paint will work here as well. So I'm just going to quickly hit the corner just to make sure we don't lose it. So that's the start there. And now I'm just going to take a hammer drill with a masonry bit that's an 1/8 inch just to drive right into that mortar or the footer, so that way we don't lose the corner. And then to top it all off, I'm going to take just a standard framing nail, put down in that hole, so that way we don't lose it. Maybe give a little peck, and then hit it one more time with paint, so there's no discrepancy with the mason to where exactly that corner is. And now we can shift this out of the way and we're good to go.
It's now time to have the mortar, sand, and blocks delivered. As you can see here, we're using a boom truck to do the delivery. I'm first going to have them lay the pallets off to the side, and this is type S mortar. And if you're going to have a mason do the block laying, you may want to consult with them to see where they want everything placed on the job site. I know this mason pretty well, and I know about where he would want it, so I had it delivered right here where it was more local to where his truck would have been. And now I'm just going to have the sand placed next to the mortar, and then we're going to deliver the blocks next. These are the 6-inch blocks, and as you can see, they're just going to use the boom truck in order to crane it over to where we need to set it, and the helper that is with the driver is going to help guide the blocks in order to be placed. And I wanted the 6-inch blocks placed more towards the center of the garage because they're going to go around the whole perimeter. And then I had the 8-inch blocks to where there's going to be a pallet on each side of the 6-inch blocks, so that way everything's more evenly distributed around the garage. I know a lot of people are going to ask me why I went with a block foundation versus a monolithic foundation versus a poured wall foundation, and that's because out of all the options, the most price efficient one for me is the block foundation. The poured walls are very nice, don't get me wrong, but for the price of them, they're definitely not worth it, especially for a garage that's this simple. Now, if you're going to build a basement house, you're definitely going to want a really strong foundation, and the poured walls might be a best option in that point. But in this case, a block foundation is definitely sufficient. We're here the next morning and the mason showed up, and he's going to install the blocks according to the corners that we had laid out. And as you can see, they're using a string line to verify and make sure each row is perfectly straight, and each course of block is going to be separated by a bed of mortar. This is one of those parts of a build that I always hire out, and the reason why that is, you can't compete with the speed of these guys. It only took them about 8 hours to have them lay this whole 26 by 38 foundation. Now if this was me, this would have taken much longer, so I left it up to the pros to get it done in a timely manner. If you're curious to know how much material and labor costs just for the block foundation, not counting the footers, well, the block was about $1,300 and the labor was about $1,000. So for about $2,300, I have a block foundation, and after it was all done, here is the front portion, and that's a 16-foot 10-foot garage door going to that far right. And then here is the side portion, and this is just a simple 36-inch door to the right side. And as you can see, everything looks really nice. And then on the back wall, there is nothing really fancy going on here. It's just going to be a straight wall with no doors in it. And then on the last wall, we do got a 36-inch door, as you can see here to the far left.
I'm back here the next day. It's been 24 hours since this foundation was laid, and I want you to note this lip that's right here. What I like to do is have a lip for a concrete slab to rest on in garages, and this will allow that. And what these are 6-inch blocks, and these are 8-inch blocks. And also this is going to allow us to build a 2x6 wall on top of this, and it's going to give us a nice flush look on the inside, especially after the drywall is installed. It'll be able to overlap and give it a nice clean look. And also some of the concrete, when we're pouring the slab, is going to fill in these cells, which is going to add strength to this foundation. And the next thing I wanted to address are these anchor bolts. As you can see, there's 2 of them right here side by side, and that's because every 16 foot, there's going to be a break using 16-foot plates for our walls. I'm going to show you that in a future video during this series, but right here is going to be a joint, so there's going to be a plate that's going to end right here, and then this bolt's going to hold this in, this bolt's going to hold this in. There has to be a bolt within 1 foot of the end of the plates, which you understand that more after you watch the video that I'm going to make in the future. And these are sunk down into the cell of the block foundation. And also take note of this parging that's on the outside of the block. And what parging is, it's just a thin layer of mortar going over the outside of the block, and that gives you a place to apply foundation coating or stone veneer. So because this is a garage, I don't have to seal this block. But if this was on a house, this would definitely want a little bit of foundation coating around here, and then leave the top course for the stone veneer or whatever you're going to apply for an exterior finish or paint. That's all up to you or your subdivision's requirements. But here it's just going to be stone veneer on this top course. Our concrete's going to come to about right here, so we're going to have to put just a little strip on the bottom, and that's going to be all there is to it. And if you want to know how we're going to pour the concrete for this garage and do the stamped concrete, check out this video. It'll help you out.